All right, thank you guys for joining me tonight. We are talking about raises and salary negotiation. And this is a very high level, quick, simple tips on how to prepare for any sort of negotiation, right? So this can be applied to both, if you're currently working in a position and want to raise, or if you're being offered a new position and kind of trying to negotiate your starting salary. So I try to keep it simple. We can dive into this later and do more, in-depth items, or, I'm happy to work through certain scenarios with people, but just wanted to get a very high level, just key takeaways. Kind of what I came up with was having the right attitude and timing, knowing your worth, and expressing your worth. Okay, so the little quote to start us off is that feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present but then never giving it. Okay, so have the right attitude. So make sure you have the right mindset. And I put this as the first item because I think it's, you can have this throughout, but you will definitely want to start in this spot where you know what you want, right? And you are like, I want to get a raise. I think I deserve more in a sense, but then you're not in a entitled mindset. So you definitely want to, even if you feel as though you deserve it, you don't want it. That's not going to be your argument, right? And then try not to be nervous. And then just kind of in the same mindset of like, you deserve this. It's pretty expected to counter an offer or that you should want a raise. And if you don't really advocate for yourself, then you're kind of leaving it to others to kind of make up your future, right? So I'm definitely a strong proponent of constantly advocating for yourself. And then another aspect of kind of the attitude is also like the correct timing, right? So both with yourself, right? If you're not in the right mindset or you're upset about something, it's probably not the best time to try to do a raise, but also you want to see the timing of everybody, right? You want everyone to have the right mindset. So if, there's people are being laid off, or it's just like, a bad financial quarter, that's not an ideal time. And then a good time would be, let's say, if you're having an opportunity for some sort of review, or you're getting feedback and you can kind of follow up with your basically showing that you've deserved it by delivering on the feedback, then that can help you be a good time on when you might want to ask for a raise. So in general, if for success in your career, you definitely want to constantly ask for feedback and advice. I've heard that it's better to ask, particularly for advice. That's just kind of like a better terminology where the person that you're asking, right, ideally your boss, feels more like you value them and you value their opinion. And I think sometimes using the word feedback is more so that, like, can you critique my work and give me kind of pointers on my work versus like, okay, my long-term goal, how do I succeed in my career, right? So you do want to constantly ask for advice. And that also opens up the door to kind of them feeling like they're coaching you. And if they feel as though you're getting better, then there's a higher likelihood that they would help you and advocate for you and help you get that raise, right? Because a lot of time you can ask for a raise and they might have some power to give you raises, but at the end of the day, when you ask for something, a lot of times your boss might not have the power to just turn around and say yes. They're typically going to have to go up to their boss or their leadership and advocate for you, right? So you want to build that relationship and have that kind of that good attitude and mindset for both people kind of through this negotiation, right? So you're in a good spot, your boss is in a good spot, and the timing is good, then you can go ahead and start planning how you would ask for more money. So the main aspect of preparing is you want to know your worth. So research the market value and then pick a number that you'd be happy with, right? So the way I went around doing this is I went on Indeed and I did a whole bunch of research on what is being paid in general, like kind of Indeed would show me like every position. And then, specifically like we were just talking about, like remote positions, but then also specifically looking at the Bay Area where I'm located and kind of getting an idea of what is the pay range, right? And what's the pay range per years of experience? If you have time, I did not in this case, but if you have time, it's also good to maybe answer some of those recruiter emails and kind of get an idea. You can even apply to a couple positions to get an idea of what they're actually paying, so you know exactly what your worth is, right? Now, sometimes the the negative aspect of that can be that if you apply to other things and then you get them, it's kind of sometimes hard for you to the timing to work out for you to turn around and ask for more money, and then you might not want to stay in your current position. And if that's not a good position, then that's a good thing. But if you are looking to have a career and you like your company, usually you want to just kind of get an idea of what is the current range, and what do you think you'd be valued at, right? And then I've heard different advice on if you want to give a range or if you want to just pick a number. And it seems like picking a number is the best aspect, because if you provide a range, the company is most likely going to go below that range or like pick the lowest number in that range, and assuming that you'd be happy with that number. So if you are to give a range, maybe make the lowest number the number that you're happy with. And or you'd be happy, like it might not be your ideal number, but you'd be okay with starting there, right? Kind of as we talked about in the last slide, always advocating for yourself. If you're waiting to have this conversation and try to get a raise, like every time you're waiting, you're just slowing your progression down. Because if you have this initial meeting and you try to have, ask for a raise, and they say no, it's not the end of the world, you can then it tells them that you're very interested and you want this, right? And so then they will kind of earmark and be ready for, okay, I know this person is looking for a raise and they're going to want this, so they're probably going to need one soon, right? So even if you can't get it right away, it's still good to get started. And that's why if you were to get any sort of raise, sometimes that's good just to get with something. And then they know, okay, well, she said a number and we went with lower, but we know that she wanted that number, right? And so then later it shouldn't be a surprise when you you have to give it like 6 months, but when you try to then advocate again for yourself and say, hey, can I get, what does it take to get to that number? They should be aware that you want that number, right? So making sure you have a number in mind that you're happy with. And this is important to make sure you do all this preparation before the conversation, right? Because in the moment you want to know what you're worth and what you are happy with and kind of what you expect, so that if it comes up in the conversation, you kind of can have that quick decision so that way you're not saying yes to a number that you lowball yourself in a sense. Okay, so this is kind of the step 3, expressing your worth. This is what you're doing during the meeting, right? So as we talked about, having that positive mindset, even if you hate your boss and you really deserve this, you kind of have to still be really respectful and try to be as professional as possible. It's just going to be better for you. And so make sure you don't say anything that you would regret or anything like that. So just be calm, be chill, and be confident in what you value, right? You've gone through making sure you're in the right mindset. You've gone through making sure the timing is correct. You've gone and done your research and you've picked a number that you are happy with, and now you're ready to rock this, right? So you're in a good space, and then you can ask them what you want, right? And a lot of times you can start with your accomplishments if it isn't like, following a review or something, right? Sometimes this will take multiple meetings, right? You might have a meeting where you kind of just start off with saying, I'd like to talk about getting a raise, and when can we talk about this, right? So you don't always have to jump them in that moment. You might want to just kind of have a very soft conversation and be like, hey, I see you're open in a week or something. So that gives them time to be ready, gives you yourself more time. So in a sense, don't rush it, but be prepared in case you're like, yeah, I have a moment right now, right? So be ready to have a list of your accomplishments. And then in general, I always advise that throughout your career, as things happen positively, you do something and you help support a team member, or something happens great in the company, like you should always be writing all these things down, and it really helps your resume development so that you're not all of a sudden applying for a job or trying to get a raise and you have to sit there and think about your accomplishments. So I highly recommend kind of thinking of your list of accomplishments in your resume as like an ongoing list that you add to throughout your jobs, not just kind of bookending your different positions. And then kind of in the aspect of be respectful, if you don't feel comfortable kind of having the conversation and you kind of like want to take time with the number, basically you can always ask for time to consider, right? So this is something that's important, especially if you are in that that salary negotiation aspect of getting a job offer, right? So that's kind of an expected thing that you don't know the number yet. They will give you the number. If, let's say it's way below what you expect or something, you can always express that, but be very gentle with that. Be like, oh, I was thinking a little bit more. I would like time to consider. That gives them an idea of where you're coming from. But you don't want to be like, wow, that's really low. Then that kind of makes it so that they think, oh, she's not going to take this, right? And if they're interviewing multiple candidates, they're going to say, okay, we're going to start moving on the next one pretty quickly. And like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty expected to go into some sort of negotiation. So you ideally should never just accept it, right? So you can take time to consider, and you can always come back and ask for $1 or $2 more per hour or a little bit more. It almost never hurts. If you go way above and are aggressive about it, sometimes that can be negative, but usually just kind of advocating for yourself and kind of being willing to negotiate is a skill that most people look for in candidates in general, right? And in their employees, right? Being able to express yourself and to negotiate is a positive skill. So don't ever kind of hesitate to not try to fight and advocate for yourself. But yeah, so I definitely recommend the asking time to consider aspect, because that gives you time to think over the offer. And I'll talk a little bit about my recent experience. And basically what I did was that I, as some of you know, I went through interviewing for my current position. And so I would be converted from a contractor to an FTE. And so I knew what I was being currently paid, and I knew that it was most likely going to be lower, but it was kind of tricky, right? Because there's been inflation, and the rate I'm being paid is from 2 years ago. So I kind of was already thinking that I could ask for more. And so I tried to do market research. I tried to fully research what the benefits could be and what they might be valuing the benefits at. And what, like I mentioned, what what could be my rate, and what other people were paying. In my situation, it was a little trickier because the position title is like a new title. So it wasn't something that was as easy to just look up on Indeed. I definitely looked at a very similar title of like a senior CTM to try to get an idea of what the pay range was. And I also talked to people. I think, as I mentioned, talking to recruiters and talking and looking at Indeed posts help, but those aren't the real numbers, especially if you're looking at like an FTE amount, because the recruiters are going to take a cut, right? And then Indeed is sometimes way off, as we were just talking about different pay ranges being so varied. A lot of times, if a company likes a candidate, they're willing to go for a lot more. And that's why when you have Indeed and other places that have just numbers that don't make sense. So I wouldn't find one source and just totally believe it. And I think the most accurate source is talking to people in a similar position at similar companies. And if the most ideal situation is your current actual company. And so I did this. I tried to talk and ask around. It was actually funny that I had already done my research, and I had kind of picked a number of what I wanted and what I wanted to shoot for. I was very excited about the position, so I kind of knew that I would take kind of anything in a sense. But I still wanted to like almost practice to advocate for myself as much as I could. And it went really well. I was surprised that I was nervous. I thought like I wouldn't be. But yeah, so I was a little nervous, and the person was kind of very charismatic, and I've had similar situations where I feel like the HR person tries to like win you over and be like, of course you have to accept this offer. And they very much want to like close the deal then. And so I had told myself to not accept their offer unless it was like something that I loved, and to very much be like, what, you know, what I said is to be like, oh, thank you so much for the consideration. I'm very excited about this offer, but I do need time to think about it. And but in my research, a lot of people had told me a lot lower numbers, and so I had almost, in a sense, started to lower my expectations. And then their offer exceeded my expectations. So I was like, it threw me off because I was so excited that I almost just said like, oh yeah, it's great, like sign me up, you know. And so I almost blew it. And I was like very much like, no, you have to still advocate for yourself. And so then I did say, oh, well, like I was thinking a little bit more. And then we kind of talked about like what the max would be. And then I just very like, I don't know, I just asked him, I was like, well, could you just submit me at the max? And he was like, yeah, sure. It was just kind of funny. And then he basically said, would you accept this offer today if we put you in as the max? And I was like, yes. And then so he did it. I will find out more. It's like still in process. So I'll actually like get all the paperwork and stuff, but it definitely exceeded my expectations, which is great. And I would love to hear anyone else want to share any sort of experience that they've had. I kind of touched on Jesse's recent experience, but if you don't want to chime in, Jesse, I can chat for you. What do you think?
Yeah, you can chime in for me.
Okay, sure. I was just kind of goes along on the lines of with Jesse, where, you know, I think it's good to always be interviewing and trying to understand what your worth is, right? It's actually good to do that, not when you're currently looking for a position. And it's always great to be interviewing, not when you're unemployed, right? It's like, it's a trickier situation. So if you can, like, be constantly interviewing and constantly trying to understand what your worth is. Yes, it takes time, right? So that's why a lot of people don't do that. But, and then in a situation where Jesse wasn't super interested in something, if people like you, sometimes they'll be able to go a lot more than what they said, right? And so especially when you kind of go to decline the offer. So that's why I think it's, if you're not that interested, it's always, it doesn't hurt you, it kind of leads them on, but that's okay usually. Where you can say, you know, like, oh, well, I was actually thinking, or you can say like, I'm interviewing at multiple places. And so I'm actually was thinking more about this, right? And now when you do that, you have to be ready for them to say, no, like this is our range and take it or leave it kind of a situation, which happens, but not always, right? So I think it's always good to advocate for yourself and to push it a little bit, because you sometimes will be surprised to see that if you're really needed and people liked you, then a lot of times they can make it work and they can go way above what they were initially saying. Anyone else have any comments? I want to share any experiences or share something that they want to discuss in future items or questions?
Yeah, I have a question, or like just pick your brain about. I've heard people like asking for a raise, and then they're interviewing for a job and they're asking for a certain amount, but they feel like they may not be able to perform, quote unquote, perform to that certain amount. Like they would expect more of me because I'm asking for more money. Like, what are your thoughts about that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a thing. And I just was talking with somebody who was trying to go down from like a director role to like a senior CTM role, but like when you ask for director level money, you are usually expected to produce that director level money, kind of a thing. I think on the lower levels, that's not always true. And I think it has to do with, so my personal opinion is no, usually, like, you know, there's other aspects of like inflation and things like that. So advocate for more, and it's okay if, like, don't hold yourself back because you're like, oh, I don't know if I can perform at that level. I think it's good to ask for as much as you can. And it usually doesn't expect that they're like, oh, well, we paid him $5 more than our initial, so we want him to put in like that much more percent effort. Like, it doesn't quite work that way. Usually just means that, like, that they had that ability to pay that much more, right? And that their want for you was more versus like what the desired output will be. So I say my vote is to always go for the more, and I don't think it will hurt you in terms of people having higher expectations for you. I think, in my personal opinion, I've always gone for positions that are kind of like, I want to keep learning and growing. So I don't usually apply for a position that I've like done already, in a sense, right? Like there'd be no point for me to go back to an old position if I know I can do it, because I'm not going to really grow and learn that much more. So you always have to think about that. So with that being said, I usually do apply for positions that I don't 100% know exactly what to do. And I think that's good. I think it helps you learn. And I think you can get a vibe from the group. But usually people don't expect you to come in, hit the ground running, and like deliver 100% on everything. I think as long as you have that effort and energy, then I think you're good. So that's my thoughts. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Okay, those are my thoughts. Anyone else?
I guess I can share my experience real quick. And yeah, I think mine really resonated with the whole just knowing your worth part. Because when I was looking for a job last, I was both unemployed, which makes me desperate, and then was also let go in a way that like really made me feel vulnerable and questioning what worth I had. So when I was looking for a job, I really was just kind of like, honestly, just I will basically take exactly what I was let go at. Even though I was unhappy with it, just because right now I'm very, very worried about my financial situation. And luckily, like I was paired up with a recruiter who wanted to bump me up at least a little bit more, because it benefits her if I make more money. And so that kind of helped raise things up a little bit. And then ultimately, I think a very similar experience happened where there seems to be something about like them being able to know it's a sure thing, because I also had like another offer kind of in the mix. And so I wasn't able to kind of give them an answer right away. And so that opened the door to conversation where they were kind of like, because eventually I went from like making 35 ultrasonics to like basically them wanting me to work for them for like 42 an hour. And I was like, honestly, okay with that. But since I had something else in the works, I wanted to see how that would play out, which then led to the conversation where like, you know what, if we give you 47 an hour, will you just take this right now? And I was like, yeah, no, done. Now I'm gonna think about it. Like that's all I need to hear. There seems to be like, I think they seem to really put a lot of value in, I guess, being able to count on you being a candidate, which I guess kind of comes into them also liking you, and then really actually wanting to work with you, as long as they just get the right number.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Logan. Yeah, I 100% agree. There is that aspect of them wanting to close the deal, and the like, so what I've heard is also like usually when they make an offer, they don't do an offer to two candidates, right? They just pick their top, make an offer. They usually keep the other one. They don't say like sorry yet, because they're kind of wanting to see how the candidate feels about the offer. But like, could be a Jesse situation where they're just kind of feeling the water, right? But if they like you and they need you, then yeah, you can advocate for more. And if they're like, okay, I can either give them more or I can keep searching and like continue, puts them back like a month, right? They gotta like do the initial interviews, and like, especially they don't have other candidates lined up. And so if they can just close that deal, then you can usually stretch them a little bit further. And that was exactly my situation too, where I was like totally happy with it, but then I was like, and then just so you guys know, so you guys get an idea of like different pay ranges and stuff like that. But basically, my offer was like, they gave me like 176